Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Ice Sheet Survival series. I know it's been a while since the last episode and I will talk a bit more about that in my next channel update. In just a few words, October was a pretty stressful month, mostly filled with work-related stuff, but I also had some work to do regarding the channel. But once again, I will talk a bit more about that in the next channel update video, which should be out in the next few days. Getting back to the gameplay, we now start things off with our very first event of the episode. A crashed escape pod crashes down on the ice sheet and let's have a look at who's inside. Right, we have the 30-year-old Omar here, who looks like a solid pick, at least skill-wise. However, he is also a pyromaniac, and that is in my opinion one of the worst traits to have in the game, and the fact that he also has a drastically increased hunger rate doesn't really help his case. Health-wise, he's also suffering from a minor artery blockage, and so all in all, I sadly don't think he's worth the trouble. Back at the base, meanwhile, our two colonists, Cobra and Cambiar, are completing a few hauling jobs. The dead body of Langy has also finally been eaten by the Huskies, and we are now looking to solve our small energy crisis. Since it is winter out on the ice sheet, we have no solar power, and especially in the last episode, that was a bit of a problem. And for that reason, I will now pick up on a smart idea that was left in the comments of the last episode, because instead of building a second geothermal power generator, we will instead research biofuel refining. This will eventually allow us to make Chemfuel out of plant matter, with which we can then power specialized generators. So this will effectively allow us to turn rice into electricity, and hopefully that way we can solve our power problems. Speaking of which, this was also pointed out in the last episode, one of our wind turbines is currently being blocked by several sections of roof. And I believe that actually changed back with the update to beta 19, which slightly increased the size of the wind turbines. Regardless, we now have one turbine that is not working at maximum efficiency, and the completionist in me of course cannot allow that, so while Cambiar is researching, we will have a very slow Cobra mine away a few stones here to make some room. The green bits here, by the way, those are roofed over, but I think you already figured that out. Now Cobra's mining job is completed and it's time to make some adjustments. Unfortunately, for that to happen, we have to completely deconstruct the existing wind turbine, which we will then rebuild in a slightly more efficient position. While that happens, Randy Random also strikes us with the first negative event of the episode, as a psychic drone hits the ice sheet and causes all of our colonists to feel some minor pain. Now fortunately, it is only a low-intensity drone, so the mood penalty is not too severe. Still, especially for Cobra, who does not have cannibalism to resort to, this could become a bit of a problem, so we should keep a close eye on him. Meanwhile, Cambiar finishes the reconstruction of the wind turbine while the next escape pod crashes down, so before we continue our work inside of the base, let's have a closer look at that. Inside, we now find the 25-year-old nurse Pina, who, as her occupation already reveals, is a fairly gifted medical worker. However, she is also incapable of violence, and that is a big issue out here on the ice sheet, especially since our colony is still very small and our colonists are not super specialized yet. And additionally, she is also abrasive and has the same hunger rate issues that we saw a few minutes ago, so it's not looking all that great for her. Her injuries were then the literal nail in the coffin, because Pina will bleed out in only 5 hours, and looking at how far away she is from the base, I have my doubts that we will actually be able to rescue her in time. All in all, I once again don't think it's worth the risk. Yes, we have pretty high standards, but at least at the moment I think we can afford to have those. Now back to the wind turbines. First and foremost, we of course need to close the holes in the power grid again, otherwise the interior of our mountain base will be completely cut off. Now if you have paid attention, then you should have noticed that by moving the first wind turbine we have created a big problem for the second one. Because as you can see, that second wind turbine is now blocked by the one we just built. However, that was somewhat part of the plan, even though that plan now includes the removal of 3 solar panels and the wind turbine itself. And yes, that is somewhat wasteful in the resource department, but it is unfortunately the only way to get 2 wind turbines up and running that do not block each other. With roof visibility turned on, we can see a good spot to place the second wind turbine now, so let's start building. And here we are, time to add the solar panels again. This will not only give us an additional power source once the sun returns, but it's also a convenient way to connect that second wind turbine to the power grid without using conduits. Now Cambiar finishes construction of the first panel and then heads off to bed, while Cobra picks up where his companion left off and completes the remaining 2. And with that, we have now slightly improved our power production. However, all in all, we are still lacking, and that will very likely not change until we get the Chemfuel production started. By the way, I decided to go for Chemfuel instead of the second geothermal generator for several reasons. The first one is plain and simple variety. While this is not one of my completionist playthroughs in the traditional sense, the second reason is that the geothermal vent is somewhat inconveniently located. Yes, it is somewhat close to the base, but still outside of our defenses, so we would have to build at least a double or triple layer of wall around it, otherwise I fear it will become too easy of a target for raiders. Now, should the whole Chemfuel power production not be able to solve the problem, then a second geothermal generator is my plan B at the moment, but I just quickly crunched the numbers a bit and I think we should be fine with the Chemfuel approach. Now, as expected, Cobra's mood has indeed become a bit of a problem. Thankfully, he is heading off to bed now, and so I hope that after a few hours of rest he should be good to go again. In the meantime, we preserve some power by switching off the stove and the multi-analyzer. The latter one is not needed for the research of Chemfuel production, and while research now goes a tiny bit slower, at least we'll make sure that our crops don't die. Shortly after then, a pirate merchant comes into the range of our comms console, and remember, we bought Cobra off of one, so this one could be interesting. And indeed, once again, the merchant has some colonists for sale. However, neither one of them really appealed to me. Yoshiko here is another pyromaniac, additionally also one incapable of violence and with an annoying voice, so that disqualified her pretty quickly. And the second colonist here, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, that guy is pretty strong in the skills department, but he is also a pessimist, resulting in a permanent mood penalty. And additionally, at 67 years old, there are some health concerns. He already has 2 scars which will permanently put him in pain, so add that to the pessimist trait and that's already a pretty big mood penalty by default. The price tag on number 2 here, by the way, also pretty hefty, so in the end I decided not to buy or sell anything. There will hopefully be better opportunities to make or spend some cash in the future. That means for Cambiar it is time to return to the research bench, however not for long. As you can see, our reserves of human meat are getting low, and I don't want to switch Cambiar back to fine meals at the moment, at least not while we have plenty of corpses still lying around, so we will have him butcher one to increase the food supply. This will once again, of course, give a small mood penalty to Cobra, but the psychic drone should hopefully wear off soon, so all in all, we should hopefully be fine. And yes, if you're just noticing the change in voice, I had to split this recording session into 2 parts, and this is some early Sunday morning recording, which often sounds a bit more rough. With the butchering complete, we then have trouble out on the ice sheet. Not only does a solar flare shut down all electrical devices, but we're also once again being attacked by a small group of mechanoids. Now, since we don't have electricity, we will not be able to rely on our turrets for this fight. Still, we do have a few traps in place, which should hopefully be enough to take care of the enemies. With Cambiar then we will close one strategically important door, and we will also leave him out here for a moment. Maybe he can land a shot or two to make the work a bit easier for the traps. Alright, the first volley connects, and that means it's time to retreat, and thanks to being in decent cover, Cambiar himself does not get hit in return. The Lancers meanwhile move in, but as expected the traps are working nicely, and so I don't think this group should give us any trouble. And indeed here we are, all 5 enemies are dead, and we even have a solid number of traps left. Now eventually we will have to redo the whole trap layout, because as you might know, the one we originally started with is no longer possible since beta 19, and so I think we should come up with something new in one of the next few episodes. We now send Cambiar back to his room to meditate and switch back over to Cobra, who is once again training the Huskies. And one thing we can see here is that our 2 youngest Huskies have grown up a bit, so both Madeline and Gork can now be trained to haul as well. So come summertime we should then have 5 capable husky haulers, which I think is going to make life out here on the ice sheet a lot easier. Now unfortunately, as you can see here on the top left, another rice harvest was lost because of the lack of electricity, but we have more than enough still in storage, and the lack of a constant source of meat might actually be the more pressing issue at the moment. As Cobra then hauls the Lancer corpses into our corpse storage room, we have 2 good things happen. First of all, the solar flare comes to an end, and with that we also see the return of electricity, and soon after the psychic drone also disappears, removing a hefty mood penalty on both of our colonists. It also does not take long until the next event appears, and this time it's a good one as we have some crashed cargo pods. Inside, some milk, 128 units to be precise, definitely a great drop and one that we will go after immediately. For this purpose, we will even wake up Cambiar a few minutes early. The Huskies, meanwhile, sadly cannot help out in this endeavor. For them, it is still simply too cold outside. As you can see here, we also have a dead corpse lying around on the map, so we should probably return that to the base soon. And as a matter of fact, just a few hours later, Cambiar does exactly that. After a quick meal, he then heads off to bed while Cobra resows some rice, and hopefully this time we will actually be able to bring in the harvest. Cobra then also heads back out onto the ice sheet for some more corpse hauling. This time it's the body of the dead nurse Pina from earlier who is brought back to the base. Shortly after then, a trade request reaches us, interestingly enough coming from the very same settlement that we already traded with before. This time, however, the offer is not as lucrative, I think. Yes, acquiring a charged lance would be pretty good. The prosthetic leg, on the other hand, is not something I'm looking for at the moment. And don't mistake it for a bionic leg, which actually improves movement speed. This one is more suitable to replace a badly damaged normal leg, and can actually be crafted very easily ourselves after completing a small research project. Additionally, producing 25 war veils, that sounds easy, but it actually isn't, because those items can only be made from cloth or wool but not from leather, and 25 of them would require a whopping 500 units of materials, which would pretty much consume every last bit of wool and cloth we have. However, I would say those materials are much better suited to make warm clothing for the ice sheet, and not in a subpar trade that doesn't really give us anything we desperately need. So we will ignore this request at least for the time being, and instead continue with business as usual. That includes more husky training for Cobra and more research for Cambiar, and from that research we actually see results pretty soon as Cambiar successfully completes the research of biofuel refining. This now opens up another world of possibilities for power production, and we will get to that in just a moment. However, first we are being interrupted by an exotic goods trader, so let us have a look at what's for sale. Right, now this trader sells a Thrumbo horn, which I think guarantees that he will also buy one. I think all exotic traders do, but in this case it's better to make sure. So before making any trades, we will now in fact butcher one of our Thrumbo corpses. Not both, that would produce a bit too much meat, and after all, the money we get from one horn should be enough to keep us going at the moment. With the butchering job completed, we then head back to the comms console, and here we can see it, we can now sell one Thrumbo horn for a nice profit of 464 silver. That is a nice amount that also allows us to buy a few things, and the first item we'll purchase is this excellent quality small sculpture made out of steel. The price is pretty reasonable for a beauty rating of a whopping 150, and while some of the bigger sculptures of course have a much higher rating, they are also much more expensive. The second item we'll get is then also a bit more on the expensive side, because we're also buying a medical neurotrainer mech serum. This will significantly increase the medical skill of the colonist who consumes it, and that is of course one of the more important skills in the game, even though so far we have been able to avoid any major injuries. Because we also sell the Thrumbo horn, we can afford all of this, and we even keep a bit of spare change for when the next trader comes by. As usual, the items are dropped right outside of the base, and we will have Cambiar consume the mech serum immediately. He already has his medical skill at a solid level 9, but that level should substantially increase in just a few seconds. And there we go, Cambiar's medical skill increases to level 13, immediately making him a strong expert. Now the sculpture will not be placed inside of the base, at least not in a traditional sense, because all of the rooms we have underneath the mountain are looking pretty solid in the beauty department already. However, the entrance area to our base technically also counts as a room because we have it closed off with a wall, and as you can see, that area is absolutely hideous. So that is where the sculpture will go, right next to the entrance to the Husky stables. However, despite a substantial boost, the area is still pretty ugly, so let's beauty the place up a bit. To get started, we will remove some of the sandstone chunks, and chopping them into smaller blocks also gives us some important materials to work with. Up next, we will then use those sandstone blocks to make flagstone floor. We could of course also simply smooth the floor for the same beauty impact, but that always takes a lot longer, and this way we can also use a lot of the spare sandstone we have. We will now lay out the entire area with this flagstone flooring, and as you can see, putting those down only takes a fraction of the time of smoothing the floor. Cobra, meanwhile, can use some of the Thrumbo meat and rice to cook some more fine meals, because even though he's the only one eating them at the moment, our supplies are slowly starting to run low. In the evening hours then, Cambiar heads off to bed, but Cobra spends a few more hours outside to finish the flooring job. He had to cut a few more stones to get enough materials, but in the end the area is now looking much nicer, and that shows in the beauty stat as well, which is up to neutral levels. That means we can now also finally get back to the whole power production thing, and we will start things off by constructing a biofuel refinery. This is the essential workstation that we need to make Chemfuel out of plant matter, and just to get us started here we will build it inside of a storage room, because that room still has a lot of space in it and it also offers a convenient connection to the power grid. Building the refinery only takes 200 steel and 3 components, and so even though our steel reserves are getting lower and lower, we still can afford it easily. With the refinery constructed, we now have 2 options. We could either make Chemfuel from wood, which is not an option for me because we can't regrow it out here on the ice sheet, or we could make Chemfuel from organic materials such as rice. And that seems like a much more reasonable approach, so let's begin with our first round of Chemfuel production. Cambiar will now take 70 units of rice to turn them into Chemfuel, and by the way, had we chosen wood instead, it would have also taken those 70 units. The end result, 35 units of freshly produced Chemfuel, and since we already have some from an earlier supply drop, this now increases our reserves to 90 units. And 90 units, that is actually quite a lot, enough to fuel one biofuel generator for roughly 1.5 months. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here, we don't have one yet, so that is what comes next. And we will build it right next to the solar panels, as close to the base entrance as possible without being in the way, and conveniently enough in this location also immediately connected to the power grid. Construction will consume another 100 units of steel and 3 components, so yes, we are running low on the steel, but I also already have a plan for that. Now the generator is up, but it's not running yet, because as you can see it needs some fuel. Its maximum capacity is 30 units of Chemfuel, so slightly less than 1 round of production at the refinery gets us. As soon as the fuel is inside of the tank, the generator then turns on, adding a steady output of 1000 watts to the power grid. That is about 1/3 of the maximum output of a wind turbine, and a bit more than half of what a solar generator is able to put out. However, unlike those two, as long as the generator is fueled, the output remains steady. A full load of 30 units of Chemfuel will also keep the generator running for roughly 7 days, and in Rimworld that equals about half a month, so a small number of Chemfuel generators should be fairly easy to maintain. For the time being, this one right here shall be enough, because with it our power production has now become quite a bit more stable, and hopefully over the course of the summer we will be able to expand on that and build a steady power network that will be able to sustain the colony throughout the next winter. For today's episode, I would like to slowly wrap things up at this point, while we watch Cambiar disassemble the Mechanoid corpses from the raid earlier. While this of course does not give us a whole lot of materials, we still receive a bit of steel, which hopefully sets us up for new projects in the next episode. For today, I think we've made good progress on the power front. There are still a few things on my to-do list, however, namely solving the steel shortage and retooling our defenses, but we will get to that next time. For today, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and as always, if you did, then I would be happy if you could leave a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel further, then you can of course either subscribe or support the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.